Welcome to Unmasked the CEO Files. I have a wonderful guest today. His name is Kevin Maney. Kevin is a journalist, an author, a consultant, an advisor, and he's recently written a book called The Category Creation Formula, which is very important to the work we're doing at Strata right now, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So, what we're talking about today is category creation for CEOs and how leaders escape comparison and what it takes to help the market see a problem in a new way. Kevin, I'm really excited to spend a little bit of time with you today.
Yeah, same, Ella. I'm glad you invited me to do this.
Now, here's the problem. We might be breaking a record that nobody's measuring. 2 years ago, I interviewed your brother Dave. I don't know if the world's ready for two Manies on one podcast. What do you think of that?
You might need a longer span of time between them, just I don't know. But yeah, it's
Yeah, well, we'll see. Dave, I hope Dave will be listening to this and we can mock him. I know you guys do that a lot to each other. You're all hockey players, right? If I recall.
we all grew up playing hockey, and yeah, I started it. I'm the oldest. I played goalie, and then of course my brother Dave had to do everything I do, so
Of
he's
course.
now he's a goalie, and
And his wife is a goalie, and
his
his
wife
kids are goalies, and oh my
exactly.
God, yeah, it's we
See
could
what I
go down.
started.
You started quite a rabbit hole. So as we do with all of our guests, we want to start with an icebreaker. So I wonder if you would answer this question for us. If you really knew me, you would know that. Finish the sentence for me.
Oh God. Well, there's so many directions I could go with that, but um, I think I'll start. I think I would go with a big one that I often like think in my head, which is that I generally come off in business situations and personal situations. I come off as very calm, controlled, very sort of zen. And if you really knew me, the Wizard of Oz and the tornado scene, that's what's happening in here at the same time. So, people think I've got it all together, and there's like this, tornado storm going on and houses flying around in my head. So,
I love the visual. That's beautiful. Well, we'll try to keep it a calm experience today, and I look forward to your wisdom. I read your book over the weekend, and it was very helpful. And I look forward to exploring as a lot of leaders are struggling with what you're able to help them with. So, thank you for sharing that. You wrote a book before called Play Bigger. Um, so, what did you feel the need for a new book and a practical formula as you describe it now with category creation for me? Tell us about that process, please.
yeah, actually, great question. So just a little background. Play Bigger came out 10 years ago.
Wow.
And um, and I wrote that with these three other Silicon Valley guys, former founders, CEOs. Had an amazing time. We created with Play Bigger this concept called category design. And people have been doing what we describe in the book. The most brilliant people, Steve Jobses and Mark Benioffs of the world, have been doing what we
Mhm.
described in the book. But we basically took it apart, gave it language, and gave people a way to think about this that didn't naturally think about it. So Plague Year comes out 2016, um, espouses this concept of category design, which actually just catches off. The book is the best-selling book I've ever been a part of.
Nice.
And soon it didn't take long before CEOs, founders, VCs were getting in touch and saying, "Can you help do what the book was about?" So I ended up forming a firm with my business partner, Mike Danfo, is called Category Design Advisors, pretty literal. And we started working with companies. And as we started working with companies, my nature, I'm very curious. I wanted to do, my whole background is as a journalist and
Hmm.
an author. And so I kept digging into like research about how categories work, what's other things we can understand, and then trying to take those and use them with clients and create ever better kind of thinking tools and things to get at the concepts we were trying to drive. And so over 10 years, I mean, it's like 10 years of field research of both, diving into the concepts, testing them in the field, learning what works, what doesn't. And it really got to a point in time where we said, like, look, we should package all this up
Smart.
into a new book because it's all new stuff, sense play bigger. And that's what the category creation formula is essentially.
So, how do CEOs not think about this in a pure marketing way, branding or positioning? What do they fundamentally misunderstand about category creation versus, I guess, differentiation in a marketing way or storytelling way?
Well, I mean, the fundamental misunderstanding comes from exactly the way you just phrased it, that it's not marketing and it's not messaging. It really is a strategy. And we won't work with any company that's not backing this from the CEO down,
Got it.
because it becomes so. Look, it's um, most companies have a product idea. They build a product, right? And
Hmm.
then they find a way to try to product market fit, classic things, right? A market that it fits into and a way to sell it and language and all of that. And and at its simplest, we're essentially turning that around and saying what you really should be doing is identifying and framing and designing a market that's going to demand what you want to do,
Hmm.
and actually building the product to satisfy what you just saw because you really paid attention to what the market needs
Hmm.
versus the other way around. We actually like go around saying, well, Mark Andreessen coined product market fit, and he was actually very right about a lot of the description of what it meant. But it's come too much to in the industry too many people believe that it just means I'm going to build a product to find a market for it.
Got it.
And what we're really espousing is something more like market product fit. How can you find a market that needs something that you can build to and design that market so it favors you?
Got it. So it's not the old build it and they will come strategy, or it's build the market and then maybe they'll come.
Well, it's build a market and see what product you really should be building,
Got it.
to satisfy what you. You just jump into one thing for a second. So the most effective thing by far that we came up with over this past 10 years is that it's the name of the book, the category creation formula. And I think running through that for a second explains a lot about the whole approach. Um, so what we did was, as we kept working with companies and kept researching market categories and how they work, we realized there certainly were patterns to the way the best did it.
Hmm.
And the more we looked at those patterns and started to understand the patterns and kind of simplify and simplify and simplify, how can we bring this down to something super simple as a way to lead people through this process?
Yeah.
And the formula that we came up with I can explain the pieces, and it's
Please. Yep.
context plus missing plus innovation gives you a new market category.
Good.
And and so when we work with a company, we'll say, okay, you brought us in. We're going to put your product, your messaging, everything, we're putting all that aside. What we're going to do now is say this is like day one, and we're going to understand the market that we want to talk to. So context means who is the audience you want to address,
Hmm.
and what is everything that's changing around that audience? That can be new tech, AI is a huge context
Yeah.
change. COVID was a giant context change.
Yeah.
Supply chain disruptions because of geopolitics and wars and such, so huge context. There's all these things that drive enormous changes in the context around the audience you want to address. And as that happens, it inevitably either creates new problems that didn't exist before, or it creates new ways to solve a problem that's been around for ages and is inadequately being solved.
Hmm.
But as any good entrepreneur knows, is that an unsolved problem is a market opportunity.
Yes.
So by going at it this way and truly understanding the context and having that long conversation around that idea, what starts to bubble out of that is what are the unsolved problems, which we call missing, context plus missing.
Okay.
So you start to see this new context, you start to see what the really important unsolved or newly solvable problems are in this new context. And if you see both of those things clearly, it becomes very easy to see, okay, now how do we create an innovation that solves for that missing in this new context?
Hmm.
if you put all those things together, I guarantee you, you're creating something that doesn't yet exist, or is at least is on the verge of existing, and able, and creating a new market category of product or service.
Hmm.
And that way of thinking can really have tremendous results in the way the company's strategy is put together. And it also gives you a story to tell because now you have a
Yeah.
narrative of saying to your customers, I understand what's going on in your life. Here's this problem that I know you're struggling with, and here's what a solution should look like. Even if we don't do it, here's what it should look like.
Yeah.
By that point in time, your customers should be going, all that is right. Just tell me what you got to offer me. And it's a very powerful marketing message.
Kevin, have you ever run into an issue where you've gone through your process, the three main pillars, you've got a problem, but market doesn't accept it for some reason, whether it's cost or complication or whatever. Have you run into that problem as well?
Well, I mean, sure, for one thing, you can do all of that, and if the execution isn't
That's
there,
true too. Yes.
right? I mean, you can do all of that. You can see the perfect innovation to create. This market is going to be hungry for it, and then you screw up the product, or like you say, the pricing is way off.
Yeah.
Something like there are many things that can mess up down the road. But what this process should prevent you from doing is building a product nobody wants.
Got
You're
it.
not, and look, there are like enormous examples of that happening in the past. I mean, one of the great ones is the Segway,
That's
right?
right.
The and Dean Kamen and his engineers create this absolutely amazing feat of engineering.
Yes.
And they get investors like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, and they believe that this is going to reinvent, the way transportation works in cities. And they put this on the market, and nobody cares. And now you have tourists going around on them and mall cops, and that's about it.
Hmm.
So it is, the process should prevent you from going down the Segway route.
Now, what's interesting in your book, you also share the knuckleball story for baseball, right? For those who love this. And so here you have, something that statistically looks better on paper. Maybe share that story and how that kind of, because that gets people thinking about, okay, I think I have a better mousetrap, but maybe you don't.
Well, and I always love like sometimes when you're trying to think about a particular, problem, it can be great to get out completely out of that like and talk about a metaphor that's completely different.
Hmm.
It makes you think differently. And so the knuckleball, I ran across this thing with the knuckleball story in part because I had done a story about the knuckleball for USA Today in like the early 2000s at some point and
Hmm.
really researched, the pitch. And it fits perfectly into this conversation because so if you look at the statistics, um, 12% of all the existing knuckleball pitchers that have ever pitched in the major leagues are in the Hall of Fame. 2% of all major leaguers are in the Hall of Fame.
Hmm.
So if you want to just even use that particular statistic, um, it tells you that maybe knuckleballs are extremely effective way to pitch. And it also has these other advantages that ball clubs like, which is you can pitch more often because it's easier on your arm. You can use that pitcher much more often. The pitcher usually, I mean, knuckleball pitchers can go into their 40s.
Hmm.
And so there's all these advantages to the knuckleball. But somewhere along the line, because of the unpredictability of it, or because it didn't seem macho enough, because you're still throwing this slow, wobbly pitch, right?
That's right.
Baseball decided that all it really wants is flame throwing, you know, giants. And so as that tended to build on itself to the point that that young kids would never learn the knuckleball, and coaches would never encourage it, and so nobody would learn it, and and pitchers would self-sort to be these 100-mile-an-hour fastball pitchers. And now you got a situation today where at opening day there were no knuckleball pitchers on the opening day rosters of any MLB club. which is an example of you can have a product that is provably
Yeah.
good, provably better than what also exists. But if the market doesn't see it or doesn't want it, it's not going to go anywhere. So again, understanding the market and the context that you're offering something into
Hmm.
becomes vital so you don't end up with a knuckleball.
Love it. And using those metaphors are really interesting because even at our in our world at Strata, we've moved into a brand new category, and so we're living in the world of metaphors, right? Or you're saying, okay, it's not this, but you know this because this doesn't exist. And one of the things you talk about in the book is the narrative and the story becomes so important
Mhm.
to be able to explain what you do. Maybe spend a little bit of time sharing I mean, we all know the importance of stories, but in the context of category creation, share how important that is in helping people understand the market in their head, as you've said it before.
And you say we all understand the importance of stories, but I find that a lot of CEOs don't
Oh, well, there you
actually
go. Okay.
understand the importance of stories, or they think they minimalize it, right? They think,
Yeah.
that's something I can come up with off the top of my head. What do I spend time on doing this? Um, and but when you really think about it, like the world is held together by stories. I mean,
Yeah.
religions are based on stories that they tell themselves, and nations and identities and
Yeah.
are based on stories you tell about yourself, right? And so we believe that that a great company has to have a story that it tells itself about who it is, and that has to be the same story that everybody says, which actually, by the way, is, when we go into projects with companies and there's 10 people sitting around the table in the leadership team, and if you were to ask every one of them to tell the story, most times they would all tell a different story.
That's right.
And so we have an ultimate outcome of what we do is something we call it a POV, point of view,
Yeah.
but it literally is a narrative story. Maybe it's 800, 900 words long. It takes 5 or 6 minutes to read. But we work it through with the entire leadership team, so the whole team feels like they own it, and that they buy into it at the end. And that story, and it kind of does follow the formula to some extent it lays out the context, lays out what's
Yeah.
missing, what an innovation should look like, and at the very end, why this company is qualified to bring this to the world.
Hmm.
And by having that story meticulously worked out and written down, um, it gives everybody, first of all, everybody should buy into that story, but it also all the little things, all the sentences, all the word choices, give the company language to use about maybe
Yeah.
how to describe the problem, or a label for the solution. All these little things matter, and gives a kind of a cohesion to the company and the way that it approaches the market. So it does really, it is a position of strength to have that.
Sounds it's like a jumping off point for marketing, right? At the end of the day, if you've got your POV, I'm assuming that includes, a deep thinking about the persona, like, who you're working with, the ideal client who you're solving for, that kind of stuff. Is that how they're using it? Is after they have the POV, they say, okay, I've got this product market fit now. Let's put some language around it as we're telling the story in different places. Is that how you pull it together with them?
Even more than that, it really has been interesting. So if you have this core story, it's like source code for everything the company does, right? So
That's
you
right.
have this core story, and we've had clients who actually have gone through this process and come up with that story and realized, okay, the product that we've built needs to be slightly different because if we're going to make the product match that story.
Hmm.
And so they literally one of our biggest clients was the sales solutions division of LinkedIn.
Yes.
And we went through this process, and the first thing they did was they gave that story to the product team and said, um, take,
Got it.
put on hold whatever you're doing and build to this story.
Hmm.
And did that before they ever used any outside language around, what they were doing. But yes,
Interesting.
so then you give the story to the marketing team, and they know what language and what position and whatever else they're going to put out there in the market. You give it to HR and say,
Hmm.
put a version of this in every job description that you put out there, because what we want are people that come to the company
Got it.
that are on board with this mission. So it can actually flow into every part of the company and inform everybody what they're doing.
I love it. It's the source code or the DNA or the software of the business essentially,
Yeah.
because that if it is the company that sometimes like in our case, we built the product and as we've read your book, we're saying, oh, that's what that was that we did. We have a label for it now, which means we have a better language around what we actually did that we didn't have a label for before. So do people often work backwards after they've built product and say, let's kind of test it and put a mirror or a lens up against it with your formula as well?
Yeah, certainly that happens. I mean, companies come to us that truly believe we've built something new, different, interesting. We don't have an effective way of talking about it, positioning it, understanding how to take it, out to the market, and that becomes an exercise in doing that. But having said all of that, we still would go into the company and say, we're
Okay,
not talking about your product. We're
got
going to
it.
put that aside and we're going to still go through this exercise. And if in the end we're really talking about the product that you built, then brilliant. Maybe half the time that's what happens.
That's interesting. So that keeps the thought process cleaner, right? When you start with the nature of the problem in the market, back to
Yeah.
your context.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it validates. And have you ever found that after people have gone through that process, they start to tweak what they built because they might have been, and we're going to talk about this in a second, adjacent, but they haven't kind of nailed it. And I do want to talk more about the adjacent possible, which is in your book as well. But tell me about how they tweak after they've worked with you guys for
Yeah.
adaptation.
No, yeah. I mean, absolutely that happens. And like I said, the LinkedIn example, they actually rebuilt the product around what the POV said. We worked with this one. So we have a very flexible structure that allows us to, work for, cash and equities, which actually allows us to say, we can work with some, you know, 40-year-old big company and they just pay us and, write us a check. Or if we see some like really cool, interesting little company
Hmm,
that's, just four or five people and they don't have a lot of money, but that we think the equity is going to be worth something, we'd work with them and just do that.
got it.
And so one of these little companies, for instance, was a company called Twos. A couple of guys that came out of Google, and they had an app that was built around this idea of to-do lists and how to keep
Okay.
track of things and all that. But there were other things sort of like that on the market. But as we got talking about this, and this was like as AI was, really starting to come into play, um, we had, the context missing innovation, the whole thing, like the conversation, and started to have this realization that, well, what doesn't exist are
Hmm.
lists that do something for you. Like you put something on your list of to do, and the list actually starts doing it,
Hmm.
which is now possible. And there was kind of an aha moment in the room of like we could build a product to do that, and
Wow.
and so these, and of course they were just a small team, so they could quickly pivot and like jump on that, and so we've definitely seen that.
I love it. So one of the concepts which I really loved and we're going to be doing at Strata, but I want you to share with everybody is the adjacent possible. So can you
Mhm.
talk to me about that concept and how it really applies in the real world?
Yeah, and this has been another one that's been really helpful, in the room with people. And um, one of my one of what's the old saying, like uh, um, good comics borrow and great comics steal,
Yeah,
and so
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
so we proudly steal. We always give credit.
Good.
And one of my favorite books about innovation of all time is this one called "Where Good Ideas Come From," which is a book by Stephen Johnson.
Hmm.
And um, and in the book, he tries to understand why certain technologies have caught on at a particular moment in time and really changed the way we work and live. Like, why did automobiles suddenly burst out at a particular moment in time when they
Hmm.
had kind of been tinkering with them before? And why not lighter? And these, and he ended up borrowing a concept from biology that he kind of massaged a bit, and then we massaged his version for our purposes. But it's called the adjacent possible. And in our version, if you can imagine that there are two axes, right? Vertical and horizontal. And the vertical axis is what technology is capable of doing. So is it proven? Is it, Zoom here, laptops, your phone, those are all provable technologies. And then there's things like quantum computing, right? Or fusion that's like way out
Hmm.
somewhere.
Hmm.
You going to happen someday, but who knows what, And the other axis, horizontal axis is us. It's like what we as people, as human beings, can understand and adapt and bring into our lives. And both of those, so both of those things constantly move outwards, right? Technology keeps getting better. We keep bringing new things into our lives. And so if you kind of draw a line between where society is and where technology is, and there's this space in the bottom left corner which gives you everything that's already exists. It's all the
Right.
possible stuff. It's things we use. It's things that exist. The technology works, right? And by the way, in this sort of category design conversation, those are categories that are already exist and are probably settled, right? Somebody
Right.
has already defined it, won it, uh, and that's if you want to go into one of those categories, you're probably going to be scraping at some market share,
Yeah.
right? And then outside of that is all the stuff that's not yet marketable and possible, right? It's things that are the technology is a little buggy, or we can't quite get our arms around it. Just doesn't, the whole thing with the metaverse probably landed out there somewhere, right? It never really quite worked, not many people really got into it. It couldn't figure out what it's useful for. But there's this band along that border that Johnson called the adjacent possible, or the biologists before called the adjacent possible. And in this model, it's like what pushes the technology a little bit farther, so it's interesting, it's new, it's cool, and also pushes us just a little bit beyond our comfort zone, but not so much that we don't get it. And it's when products and services land in that space, it is when they get adopted
Got it.
in a mass scale, right? And look, we often work with these sort of visionary founders who have this unbelievable idea for what things are going to be like 5 or 10 years from
Yeah.
now. And one of the exercises with them is to say, that's wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely going to happen. But if you stick with that as what your company is building, you're probably going to run out of time and money before it gets there.
Got it.
So, how can we reel this back and land a product today that hits the adjacent possible, and then take people on a journey out there as that border constantly expands? And if, on the other hand, if we have a conversation and we're talking about some product or services that lands firmly in an existing category in the possible, we'll say like, look, if you really want to be different and change the world, we got to get out of here and push out, find a place in the adjacent possible, and an idea that takes us beyond that as it
Yeah.
moves. And when we see that, how can we tell that story? So that becomes another tool that works really well.
I could see why a lot of the conversations that you have with these leadership teams are really the core to the work, isn't it? It's really understanding, their vision and how their vision maps to what's real and what they can make real, right? Because
Yep.
sometimes it exists, sometimes it doesn't exist. I'm curious about your perspective on the problem that we're facing at Strata, and I'm not going to go through it because I don't want it to be a Strata commercial, but when you have something that, if we call them adjacent, that looks like communication, looks like performance, feels like coaching, but it's none of those things and all of those things, where is but there's a real problem that no one can see. It's invisible.
Hmm.
Is it the same process that you use to go through something that's relatively unique, um, but adjacent to all these other things that people will put you in that category? Oh, you're going to help me improve communication. You're going to help me be a better performer. You're going to help me. But no, we aren't going to do any of those things. Like, what's your approach when you have people putting you in categories that you don't want to be in because it kind of drives your value down. What thoughts do you have around that?
And that is a reason that we get the phone calls sometimes. It's
Got it.
like, that's uh and so our approach is to say, like, we have to define this as something that it is new,
Yeah.
and that describes, again, this goes back to the power of having that narrative story, right? To
Yeah.
tie all those pieces together and explain what the problem is that it's solving, what some language is around that is not those categories, but actually is defining something that seems new and interesting and actually puts you in that adjacent possible, right?
Yeah.
If you take all those categories singularly, they're all going to feel like they're like, I knew that. I know
That's
what
right.
that is. That's that sort of thing. But if you tie them together in some new way, and it's actually a solution that never existed before, to a real problem that people have, then you're making it seem new and interesting and real too at the same time.
Yeah, see, I was really looking for free consulting. That's what I was doing, Kevin, by asking you that stuff. But it's interesting. And back to your storytelling, what we have found that works is people have to have, to your word, context to understand something. They have to, so they, oh, it's like that because that's what they're feeling. And there's no place for the other part to land. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
really, so that's where the story, and we keep refining the story to go, oh, that's now working because they see it as this. When I say X, they see Y. Okay, we got to pull that story together. But like, it's a time issue, isn't it, to allow markets to, or is it all us? Is it us, or is it the market, or is it the combination of those two that pull it
Well, it can
together?
it can be both, but here's where the whole thing about um, doing a great job of describing the problem to be solved helps a lot, because
Yeah,
that gives people a hook to latch onto, right?
got it.
If if you go look, 90% of tech companies, and you open their website, the first thing that it shows you is, here's what our product is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, and I have to dig around to start figuring out, well, would it actually do for me?
that's right. Yeah,
And if you start out with, look, we understand there, or we're gonna, and sometimes you describe a problem people don't know they have until you describe it.
that's
That's
right.
one thing that happens too, right? But if you describe that and everybody goes, oh, that's true. I mean, ultimately, you want to say something that's true.
Yeah,
People feel like, okay, I get it. Now I want to know what that solution is, rather than the other way around of, here's the solution, you figure out what problem it solves.
yeah. No, it's a real thing, and we're having a blast trying to figure it out as well because when you nail it, it's really good because the problem is real and costly, but when no one can see it, like literally invisible, then you kind of have to go, okay, I've got to make it visible. So our whole thing is making the invisible visible.
Yeah.
And right, and so kind of building off of that. So as you think through, what are the biggest misunderstandings about what you do?
Well, you hit it earlier. I mean, the biggest misunderstanding about what we do, we fight all the time, is like, this is about marketing and messaging,
Yeah.
when it's really far deeper than that. I think that's the biggest misunderstanding.
What's interesting is because at the end of the day, there is a story and a message. So very similarly, I mean, I love the fact that the book and the company is really the category for you,
Yeah,
isn't it? Right. So
yeah, yeah.
so it's very clear. Like I was watching somebody commercial today. It said something about affordable dentures, something. Okay, I know exactly what it is. It's affordable dentures for you. So they were creating a category inside a category, I assume, with their
Yeah.
messaging. So it's really clear and linear that if you're looking for affordable dentures, these are the people you want to talk to. And assuming they have all the other stuff that you've talked about that's in there.
It's
That's
an
interesting.
interesting phrase. I'll give you one other little thing that we ran across. Um, so here's and actually gets a little to your misunderstanding thing too. Um, Sometimes people get too hung up on, we want that name, we want that, label, we want, CRM, or
Yeah,
whatever, that thing that everybody catches on. And I think, to some degree, it's less important than you might think. I mean, have the
yeah,
story actually is more important than that little label. And sometimes the market or is going to, run with something different and just go with it. Don't. However, sometimes the label, like affordable dentures, sometimes the
I
label
got
can
them
be
all.
really, can
As
be
hockey
really
players, we all know that
no,
that's
no.
real. So it's, sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. Um, uh, and so there turns out there was this one academic study we ran across that was said that was that these phrases catch on when you use take a word everybody understands
Hmm.
and snap on a word that makes that seem different than what it was before.
Got it.
And so, like, I mean, there's examples all over the place. Like, you have, we all had a phone,
Hmm.
and somebody comes along and says, "We're going to make a smartphone." Okay,
Yeah.
well, I understand. I have something to latch onto. I
Yeah.
understand that it's a phone. Now tell me what the smart part is.
Got it.
Or, cloud computing, right? Cloud
Yeah.
computing comes around, and we all knew what computing was. And now you put cloud in front of it. Okay, now I get it has something to do with computing. I can latch onto that, but
Yeah.
cloud makes me think there's something different or new about this. So we'll often run through that exercise is how can we find that label that works that way?
I love that. So everything comes back to the story you're telling, the narrative point of view, because you're trying to get inside somebody's head, right? They have a problem, but at the end of the day, it exists here. And
Yeah.
if the problem is good, then they'll pay for it and stuff like that. My last question is this: you've used the word technology a lot, and you've thrown in the word services. Are they the same thing when you call it a product market fit? Does it really mean product or service in your category, or is it really product fit in the traditional tech sense?
Yeah, I think service, product, anything. I mean, it's basically understanding and designing the market. So whatever you're offering wants what you're offering. And I mean, look, most of the companies by far that we've worked with have been technology companies.
Yeah.
But we worked with an ice cream maker.
Yeah.
We worked with a couple of, companies that were
Hmm.
making something so far, simpler than that. And we pull examples.
Yeah.
You know, uh, One of the stories I tell in the book you probably ran across was about monster trucks.
Yeah.
And there's this guy outside of St. Louis who, you know, basically dreamed up this thing and ended up selling it to the world and creating a completely new form, new category of not only vehicle but entertainment. It can apply to anything.
Interesting. It's brilliant. Kevin, is there something that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure everybody knows about what you're doing, how you're doing it? And then my last point is how do people reach you? But is there any last point that you want to share with people that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I guess I would say this, that we wrote the book in a way so that we wanted anybody who wanted to do this for themselves, for the company, to be able to take this book and actually use it as a playbook and know exactly how to run through these exercises and do it themselves. And that was important to us because we wanted more people to be able to do and think this way than just whoever would come in contact with the few people who were practitioners.
Gotcha.
The flip side of that I would say is that it's very hard. It's like trying to be your own psychologist.
Yeah.
It can be very hard to do this completely internally. And whether it's us or whether it's or somebody else who comes in to sort of lead the whole thing, having that outside perspective can actually be tremendously helpful in going through these kinds of exercises.
Well, if I can build on that for a moment, I think what's also important is that the fact that you've worked with all these other companies, there's only so many business models out there,
Yeah.
right? And you can put a magnifying glass on a problem you've seen before that kind of looks like this that they have no way of seeing. Is that correct?
Well, absolutely. And actually, I find that my 40 years of journalism
Yeah,
sometimes come in handy because I've been writing about this industry for a very, very long time, and yeah, and can bring up things that I've seen that somebody who's 25 and starting a company doesn't know about.
that's awesome. Kevin, how do people reach you to either, well, they can buy the book. We'll put put that in the show notes so people can get access to the book. And if they want more information, find out more about your company, what's the best way to reach you?
We have a website, it's pretty straight ahead called categorydesignadvisors.com. And we're of course you can find me on LinkedIn and anywhere else. I mean, it's pretty easy to find us.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time. And hopefully your brother Dave is watching this and we can all wave to him in a very nice way. You can wave to him
I
however you want.
think one of these days we all need to have a beer together, I think. So,
That's easy. Well, we know where he lives. We know where you live. So let's make sure we can do that.
all right, Alan, sounds
Kevin,
good.
enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.